Welcome to another episode of the News Roundup. Today we'll be discussing the recent backpedaling by the nation of Israel, like so many national and state governments have begun now doing by pulling back their crushing COVID restrictions. We'll discuss what this dramatic about-face means. And so, from Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and our episode starts now. So, recently, Israel's coronavirus cabinet dropped the requirement for vaccination proof for most places, meaning Israelis no longer need to show their green pass or proof of vaccination. This removes barriers to admittance to hotels, restaurants, theaters, and gyms. This is a dramatic turnaround, evidencing a major shift in pandemic response and policy by the nation of Israel. Even more interesting, all these moves are happening despite pandemic-shattering records and a disturbing increase in COVID-related deaths. See, at the end of January, we here at Trial Site News reported SARS-CoV-2 cases hitting new highs. This despite not only being one of the heaviest vaccination populations worldwide, but also one of the top booster rates. In fact, Israel has now moved to its fourth booster dose with the Pfizer COVID vaccine. The daily death tally has grown despite the high vaccination rates. On February 1st, Israel had the highest number of deaths in one day at 121, and just days later, on February 3rd, the number hit 86. These numbers of deaths were not anticipated by those in leadership, given that nearly every adult had received 3 doses of the vaccine, and many now are on their 4th dose. And yet, coronavirus cases in Israel have spiked despite all these preventative measures taken. Interestingly, the serious cases and number of deaths are persisting. For example, on February 3rd, there were over 46,000 new cases, which was a steep drop from the over 60,000 on February 2nd. Now, of those cases, only 1,132 were labeled as serious, and 355 of those were critical. To date, over 650,000 Israelis have received a 4th vaccination. And since the start of the pandemic, over 9,000 Israelis have died, while nearly 3 million Israelis have already recovered from the virus. Meanwhile, despite the about-face for the most overbearing restrictions of the Israeli people, the government of Israel will continue to enforce coronavirus regulations, which include mask wearing and the unvaccinated providing proof of a negative COVID test every 48 hours in educational institutions or so-called high-risk events like weddings and parties, which would still require a certificate. Now, the school extensions will still continue until March 1st and will then be subject to the approval of the Education Committee of the Israeli Parliament. The new Israeli Green Pass regulations were also extended until March 1st. Now, there are exceptions to the new requirements, and they include event halls or gardens, conference halls where cold food is served, and cultural events where audiences will not be seated for the duration of the event. Also, the government will no longer require an occupancy limit in places still operating under Green Pass rules, and restaurants will no longer have to keep tables 1.5 meters apart or 4 feet. In any case, questions about the effectiveness of the 4th shot continue to persist. The Israeli Health Ministry has acknowledged infections have declined, but serious cases of COVID and the number of deaths have still increased. Of course, what they failed to mention was that the current surge has shattered all previous daily new infection records due to not only the highly transmissible Delta and Omicron variants of concern, but in part because of the Pfizer vaccine that wanes in effectiveness over time. And of course, we'll keep you posted on this story as it continues to develop. And that, my friends, brings our episode to a close once more. As always, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. From Trial Site News, I am Adrian, and I will see you all next time.